Teal dear, ThinkTank does not understand numbers, statistics, and reading. But let us wade on through their intellectually dishonest propaganda and clickbait and find out why.
A new study shows 1 in 3 college men would force a woman to have sex against her will if he thought he could get away with it.
Well, that sounds absolutely terrible. I sure hope you've got a fantastic study with a very representative sample size, and in no way misleading questions that has helped you come to this conclusion.
I'm pretty sure there's a word for that.
Oh, there's a word for what I do to you as well. I'm not even looking at her or looking at him. I'm looking at that T-Rex skull in the background there wearing its lipstick. Ooh, look at it, it's just asking for it. It's such a tease!
John and Hannah here, and while what I said in the intro is true,
it's not really, but we'll get to why later.
It's not even the worst part, and we'll get to that in just a second. This research was done at the University of North Dakota. They talked to 73 men attending the same college.
Well, that representative sample size has sure got me convinced.
31.7% of those asked said they would act on intentions to force a woman to sexual intercourse if they were confident they could get away with it. But the far worse part is, when asked whether they would act on intentions to rape a woman with the same assurances they wouldn't face consequences, 13.6% of participants agreed.
So those numbers that you've just heard have come from this study, denying rape but endorsing forceful intercourse, exploring differences among responders. And just so we can be completely clear that this guy has not lied about those numbers quoted, here they are from the study. But how did they arrive at these numbers? Well, let's have a little look at their methodology, shall we? Materials and methods, participants and measures. 86 male college students received extra credit for their participation. All participants were over the age of 18 with a median age of 21, and most were juniors in college. The overwhelming majority of participants, over 90%, identified as Caucasian, consistent with the general student makeup at this university, and all identified as heterosexual with prior sexual experiences. Cool, so we know who we're dealing with. So let's now skip on down to the part about the method to do with sexual aggression, because that's the part that we're interested in. Attraction to sexual aggression. The survey concluded with part of the Attraction to Sexual Aggression scale, Malamuth 1989. This scale measures self-reported likelihood to engage in a variety of sexual behaviors if nobody would ever know and there wouldn't be any consequences for the participants. The behaviors that were included were heterosexual intercourse, forcing a female to do something sexual she does not want to do, and rape. Now, I'm very intrigued to look at this Malamuth study from 1989, because obviously if all of the research in this paper is based on that, then we need to go back to the source. And fortunately, I happen to have that right here. So as a quick little bit of information on the Malamuth scale, if you could be assured that no one would know and that you could in no way be punished for engaging in the following acts, how likely, if at all, would you be to commit such acts? And the answers to this were given on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being not at all, and 5 being very likely. But let's look very carefully at the wording used here. The Malamuth study actually specifies forcing a female to do something she didn't want to do. And now let's contrast that to Edwards' study. Forcing a female to do something sexual she does not want to do. So, in quoting Malamuth's work, Edwards has in fact added the word sexual to the sentence, and this quite heavily changes the meaning. And this is a very, very important distinction to make, because you can force someone to do something in a sexual situation without committing sexual assault or rape. So let's say, for example, in a sexual situation, forcing a woman to do something she doesn't want to do could include something as simple as saying, I'm not going to have sex with you unless you put on this outfit that I like. Now, that is not sexual assault, nor is it rape. At worst, it is coercion, which is still an absolutely despicable thing to do to someone, but let's not call it what it isn't. So the problem that I have with this is that in this new study, they have taken the old study, in which it had a very subjective question, quite an open-ended question, and they have instantly said it was always in regards to sexual activity. There is no other possible way of looking at it. In fact, they have inserted the word sexual into that sentence where it previously wasn't. This is very dishonest. But wait, It gets better, because another YouTuber by the name of Mr. 1001 Nights actually emailed the professor who authored this study, and basically pointed out that the percentages that they've pulled up here in no way actually correlate to the percentages of this original study. And the response that he got was quite surprising. Let's watch.
She actually responded today after a whole week, and this professor, and she says, no, we had them rate their likelihood on a scale from 0 to 100. We counted everyone who indicated greater than 10 in the intentions group. And of course, we're referring to this intention to do something she didn't want to do. That's the main key measure. So my answer is right, but 0 to 10 out of 100 are the not at alls, those who, in your own words, could not be, quote, counted in the intentions group. In other words, in Malamuth's not at all to very likely 1 to 5 scale of forcing a female to do something she didn't want to do, your 0 to 10 belongs in the not at all group.
So basically, what's happened here is, as you can see, they've rated from a 0 to 100 scale and then transposed that into the Malamuth scale. And as was just pointed out, basically, if a respondent didn't indicate 1 on the scale, which is absolutely not, then numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 have all been taken as being affirmative answers. Which is kind of weird, because on scales like that, the number 3 tends to be neutral or indifferent, and the number 2 tends to still be a negative answer. So what's happened here is they've basically taken a bunch of people who have said, well, I'm pretty damn certain that I wouldn't do this, but if there's a situation in which it arose and there was absolutely zero ramifications for my actions, there's a small part of me that might possibly say I would. Well then, according to this survey and how this person has chosen to interpret the data, that person is endorsing rape. The mental gymnastics required is astounding. So now that we've found out that all of these numbers have been obtained under incredibly dubious circumstances, let's continue with the actual video.
You can take that one of two ways. One is that the number went down to 1/3 of what it was originally, which is good, but 13.6% of college men say they would rape a woman if they could.
But they didn't. Only 1.7% of respondents said that it was very likely, which doesn't mean guaranteed. Even if we add all of the people from the number 4 group, a group that you would assume would say it would be fairly likely but still not guaranteed, which is 4.9%, which would give us 6.6%. Now, number 3 on this scale could be the option that the person has no opinion one way or the other, or it could mean they are just as likely to do so as just as likely not to do so. So even if I'm really super duper kind to you and I give you that entire plus 5.6%, that still only brings us to 12.2%. No matter how many times and ways you slice this, the mathematics behind these numbers is still fuzzy as fuck. But here is an interesting thing to think about. I have arrived at 12.2% using data from 1989 by counting people who answered this survey with the numbers 3, 4, and 5. This new study has come up with the number 13.6 by counting all the people who answered numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5. Doesn't this kind of hint that actually, over time, then the number has got lower? Because surely, if they didn't count everyone who answered number 2 in this survey, they only included 3, which is being generous by itself, but 4 and 5, that the number would be considerably lower than 12 or 13%. Just something to think about.
Well, also, I think we just need to get these 73 men a dictionary.
I think, well, yes.
They just need to figure out what the word actually means.
In the same way that you people, or at least your research department, need to actually learn how to read.
Yes. Well, both of those statistics are obviously scary.
And wrong. But has it not occurred to you that maybe they are meant to sound scary? Because publishing something like 37% of men think it's okay to rape women, as opposed to the actual findings that about 1% think it's okay, which one do you think is going to generate more clicks? Which one do you think you can take to a government as a lobby or a pressure group and extract more money from them with? Again, just a little bit of food for thought.
I find the 13.6 to be the scariest.
Insane. But you know
what if you asked if you could murder a person and not get away with it? Would 15% say yes?
Probably yes. If you give anyone a hypothetical scenario in which there is zero repercussions for what is normally considered to be a criminal act, unsurprisingly, a higher number of people are going to say yes, they would do it than otherwise. Which is why basing these sort of surveys on hypothetical situations is retarded. And that's before we even talk about your ridiculously small sample size.
Bad thing is, I think that 30% is probably an underestimate of the actual number. I mean, because 73 people is a really small sample size.
It is, of course.
If you took, let's say, and North Dakota is not a very populous state, so maybe if you took more population,
I mean, who knows where the community is coming
if they
from.
were doing it, you know what I mean? There's
It's
a lot
possible.
of confounding factors in there that could affect that number, and I think it would be bigger.
A sample size of 73 people is not even good enough to give you an accurate idea of that college, let alone any sort of wider society. Honestly, at this point in time, I think there is only one appropriate response to this study and its authors. Get out.
Yeah, and they say that they want to follow it up with, obviously, a study with far more people, and I imagine they would probably combo with professors at other schools so they could get a sample from different parts of the country.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see those results out of Harlem.
Either way, I mean, those are some
it's
pretty
really
scary numbers. Sarah Edwards is an assistant professor of counseling who was involved in the study, who says, the number one point is there are people that will say they would force a woman to have sex, but would deny they would rape a woman. Now, if you were to actually exit interview every guy and ask, what did you think force a woman to have sex meant?
But that wasn't the question, was it?
I would be very interested to see what they say, because they obviously, 2/3 of them would not rape a woman, they say, so they think it means something different. I don't know what it is they think it means.
Or there's such a negative connotation with the word rape.
You know, we're nowhere near the end of 2015 yet. But guess who just won the award for most obvious statement of 2015?
There's them.
But that you say, like, oh, I shouldn't say that I would rape a woman. But then when you are not thinking about it in logical terms and you just say forcibly have sex with somebody, then they'll be like, oh, yeah, whatever. Like, she's drunk.
Yeah.
Yep, college students are just that easy to trick. They don't know what rape is if you use a different word. Or maybe it has something to do with the college professor who organized the study. You know, the one that just said a nice nebulous term such as, make them do something. And then, in the confines of that professor's own mind, they determined that the word something means rape.
Because the thing is, you could sort of fool them into seeming like they want to rape someone by doing words that sort of hide, maybe pressure someone into sex or try to convince them.
Please don't give them ideas. Because the next step is then idiots like this saying that a man trying to convince a woman to have sex with him is rape. Because that would basically turn pretty much every sexual encounter ever into rape. Because if you're a guy and you're asking a girl out on a date, that is basically you saying, well, let me show you what I got, which is trying to convince them to date you.
But they say even force.
Say force is a pretty strong word.
That's not even hiding it all that much, and still 1 out of 3 men said that they would. Now, there are some differences between the group of guys that say they would force a woman and those who say they would rape a woman that they found. They found that men who were comfortable admitting their intentions to rape displayed a wide range of outwardly hostile attitudes towards women. The men who rejected the rape language but said they would still use force against a woman didn't display that level of outward hostility. But they were still linked with what the researchers defined as callous sexual attitudes. Basically the idea that women are objects, men are aggressors, and it's just, if you're being hypersexual, you might be doing some forcing.
And this author's entire interpretation of what constitutes callous sexual actions comes from a paper by someone called Donaldson, published in 1993. A paper entitled, What is Hegemonic Masculinity? Oh, I wonder what side of the fence this falls on. And if you actually read this paper, you will notice that all it is page upon page upon page of assertions and hypotheses. Not a single number, not a single chart, nothing statistical. And then we get a wonderful little laugh at the end here. Citation 2. The second shit, whocking parents, and the revolution at home. Academic feminism at its finest. Remember, kids, spell checking is part of the patriarchy.
I think, in addition to that point that you made from the article, is that they did a study that was focused on teenage girls in the U.S., and they found that most of them assume that sexual coercion and violence is normal because that's kind of the norm now, because men just kind of do it, and they feel like men can't control themselves.
Yeah.
So it's both ends have this
norm
morphed idea of sexual, interactions.
Okay, a few points here. People are increasingly thinking that things like rape and sexual violence are normal because bullshit studies like this keep being given coverage. And if you want to talk about things warping people's sexual expectations, let's talk about some of the best-selling books of all time. Books that have been made into a movie. And it was all targeted at women. And it's all about a woman being sexually coerced into doing things she doesn't want to do and enjoying it. So maybe this idea of a man not being able to control his lust for a woman is in fact some sort of fantasy to a large part of the female population.
I mean, I think that so we should differentiate. So they consider it the norm, I think partially because we're more willing as a society to talk about it.
Right.
The actual percentage of people who are raped, the number of rapes per year, is at far lower than it was decades ago.
A record low number in most cases.
So it's not actually
but it's still
more.
at a crazy
No. I know. I'm not
high
saying that at
level.
all. I just don't want to feed into like people like if people like get attacked by sharks, then they think that there are more sharks. The actual number is down, and the reason I say that is because that is a good thing. We should be proud that society has less. It's still any is bad. I'm simply pointing out statistics.
I'll point out, like 1 in 4 women will get sexually assaulted before they're 25.
No. Just fucking no. This statistic is a lie. Stop using it.
That is fucking
Yeah.
crazy.
So, no,
that is
one-
not like a small
one is
statistic
not
to
okay.
be like, you know.
I know. I'm just saying that
25%,
we
1 in
do have to
4.
acknowledge that it's lower. But I mean, the obvious disconnect here is that so many of these guys, and we're talking about at least 20% of college guys, at least in the study, don't see the connection between forcing someone to have sex and raping someone, and that is where I think education, hopefully, maybe I'm being idealistic, but hopefully could convince them that that is the same thing.
No, and I think that's a really good point, because I think a lot of the time that like rape prevention is focused on the woman, like don't get too drunk, watch your drink, watch what you're wearing, like all this other bullshit.
So, taking precautions for your own well-being is bullshit, apparently. Of course it is. I mean, who wants to take responsibility, right?
Whereas the education really needs to start with the men, because they're committing the act. So if you're informing them, okay, this is what's considered rape.
In this case, they're committing the act. Obviously, college men also get raped.
Yes.
We're focusing on one particular direction.
In larger numbers. But I think that if the education focused on men, like informing them and educating them, then maybe the problem wouldn't arise as much.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, although we do have to understand that there is going to be some percentage of people who will do it regardless, because 13.6% are saying they would rape someone.
No. About 1% of people said they were going to. But at least you're right about one thing here, and that is that 1% of rapists is always going to try and rape people, regardless of whatever laws, rules, and education you put in their way.
And so there is a certain percentage of humanity who will do any terrible thing, so long as they think there will not be consequences.
Yes, and those people are called psychopaths.
And I guess we just have to... Well, one thing that we could do that could help with that is universities could actually take seriously when people say that they've been raped and actually have some negative consequences.
Because universities totally don't take accusations of rape seriously at all.
And maybe one of the reasons so many men are willing to say that they would is because they don't see a lot of people suffering consequences for doing it. And so they think that it's not so bad. Whereas maybe if we were to change that, actually get the universities to do something about it, we could see that number go down as well.
But the survey quite specifically said there will be no negative consequences. Or have you forgotten that fact already?
And have like an education about the consequences of what it does to the woman who's raped, or a man, or whoever's raped. What the consequence is, that not just like, oh, you're going to get punished if this happens. Exactly.
Yeah, so I'm going to close this out by giving you just a couple of thinking points there. One, what did the men actually think force meant, if not rape? Play devil's advocate. What were they actually thinking?
I already have, but thank you for your suggestion.
And what do you think that universities and professors can do to help solve part of this problem?
They can do a lot. The real question is, should they? Rape and sexual assault are criminal acts, and should therefore be dealt with by the police, not by university professors and dodgy social justice kangaroo courts.